All right, so here we go. So again, I'm very, very, very flexible on this. So if you guys have questions, please interrupt. Go ahead and put things in the chat. Unmute yourself and yell at me if I miss it in the chat. But basically what I really thought would be a good class kind of with our listing focus of the month is how to price properties to sell to buyers. But then also kind of the difference between how to look at that and then how to weave in the fact that for most properties, eventually you're going to have an appraisal as well. And so kind of what are the different things that you want to pay attention to? So the first thing that we want to look at is, what do buyers care about? And the reason why that's important is if for those of you that have taken bold, you'll remember in Diana Kokoska's listing script, she says, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I want to take a minute to walk around your house and look at your house through the eyes of a buyer, because we always know that the sellers think that their house is the greatest thing and that the upgrade that they did 20 years ago is still worth twice as much as they spent on it. So when we think about what buyers care about, this is going to be the interactive part. Since none of you have your camera on, I'm going to make you talk. What do you guys think as a buyer? And even Kendra, you don't have to be an agent to answer this. What do you think buyers care about when they're looking through a house?
Location.
Okay, good.
And then to add on to that, the floor plan.
Okay. Who else?
How much stuff they're not going to have to fix.
Okay,
Yeah.
so condition.
Up to date.
Updates. Okay. All right, you guys got most of them, I think. I just threw out granite countertops because I feel like that's the thing that sellers always talk about. But I'm creating this list to talk about what buyers care about versus what appraisers care about. So buyers do care if there's granite countertop or Formica countertops. Buyers do care if there's walk-in closets or not walk-in closets. Buyers do care if there's a pantry in the kitchen or not a pantry in the kitchen. They do care about a finished basement. They do care if the floors are wood versus laminate. And they also, in this market, more than anything else, they care about how good this home is compared to the one that they lost out on last week. Unfortunately, none of those things matter very much to the appraiser. So is there anything else that anybody else thought of since I started talking that I missed on the list?
Stainless steel appliances.
There you go. Exactly. And those are valuable, right? Because if a buyer has to have stainless steel appliances and this house has them, guess what that did? It just saved them money. Kendra, I saw you unmute and then mute again. Were you going to add something?
No, I just keep losing connection. Thanks, though.
Okay. Okay, no worries. All right, so what do appraisers care about? They care about square footage. They care about bedrooms, kind of, and a little squirrel on bedrooms. One time I had like a 20-minute conversation on a short appraisal with an appraiser who was super nice, by the way, because most of them just won't even talk to you. But he explained to me how he's been an appraiser for like 25 years, and he's actually done research and taken large swaths of data on the difference between 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom homes and found that the pricing is almost exactly the same. So when when a seller says their house should be worth more than their neighbors because they have a 4th bedroom, appraisers say statistically that's inaccurate. There is a big difference between a 2-bedroom and a 3-bedroom, but 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom from an appraisal perspective, not as significant.
See, I learned something new. I knew I would. I didn't know that appraisers look at it that way.
There you go. There you go. Because oftentimes the square footage is gonna vary a lot, and so they usually have a 4th space, which for most buyers, that's what they're using that 4th bedroom for. I mean, obviously some buyers have 3 kids that they need 3 bedrooms for, but a lot of times people are using that space for something else.
I also have
Bathroom-
something else that buyers care about, or some buyers care about
Yeah.
that appraisers don't, is technology.
Yeah.
If there's, obviously surround or Sonos, or blinds go up automatically, and some of the higher priced homes, appraisers don't care about what is in there or what's included in that.
Yeah, upgrades in general, right? I mean, upgrades in general are very much, and we've, if you've been in the business a while, you've probably had a new build client that over improved. And a new build appraisal came in low. So usually those contracts say that if the appraisal comes in lower, the buyer still agrees to buy the house, which can put you in a pinch if they over upgraded. Basement size, finished or unfinished, they care. The basement square footage is definitely not the same as the above ground square footage, so definitely something that is worth looking into. Number of garage spaces. And then they only pretty much care about the sold properties, sometimes because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac require them to have 5 properties on the appraisal. They will include active contracts, but when they figure out the price, they're going to weight them a lot less than they would a sold property, especially a
I've also
recently
had,
sold.
I've
No,
also
go ahead.
had appraisers, I've included in letters to appraisers how active the, showings were and how many offers we got, especially if they're over listing price. And that they do say that does help. I've talked to some after appraisal, and they said, no, I'm glad you let me know about that. Not that they don't know it's a crazy market, but just that particular house, like our house in Verona, we had 36 showings and 6 offers on $1 million house.
I cannot believe that.
Unbelievable.
Did you end up getting the cash, by the
We
way?
got a cash offer. We're closing on Thursday.
Crazy.
And it's a lot above list price.
That's
It is
insane.
crazy.
Look
So
at you
luckily we didn't have to
setting
worry about the
records.
appraisal on that one, but
Yeah, setting records. Well, cash, and we'll get into that in a second, but definitely cash is all over the place right now. So, all right. So the first thing that I wanted to do after kind of talking about those differences is quickly go through what my appraisal process looks like, or what my market analysis looks like when I'm pricing a property. And then we're going to jump in, and I actually pulled an old appraisal on one of my investment properties to just kind of go through what appraisals look like and how they make adjustments, and kind of look at what's more important versus less important. So for me, the very first thing that I think that we need to discuss is making sure that you're looking at all the statuses. So I'm going to dive into the area. So first I'm going to adjust the status to active, contingent, pending. Obviously those are currently on MLS and then sold within the last 12 months. Appraisers like things within 6 months, but 12 months is definitely about as far back as you're going to want to go. And then expireds and withdrawns in the last 12 months. And that's important from a pricing perspective, because you always want to know what didn't sell and what it was priced at. So then the first thing you're going to do is look at the area. And typically I'm going to go and run through a quick example after we go through this. But you're going to look at the subdivision first, because if you can find 2, 3, 4 comps, from the actual subdivision, the same subdivision, that's going to be absolutely the best. If you can't find comps from that subdivision, then you might need to expand out into either the city or the school district within that specific price range. Can you guys see all your names here on your screen, or no, or do you just see my slides?
See all the names.
You do see all the names? Okay, I'm gonna minimize that then. Okay. So within that price range, then the next thing you're gonna do is narrow it down to the style. So you're gonna compare the style, the square footage, and then bedrooms, bathrooms, basement, finished, unfinished. Is there a basement? Yes or no? And then condition and finishes of the house in general, like Diane was talking about with different technology. Is it a fixer upper? Is it move-in ready? And then location and lot size. And when I talk about lot location, I don't just mean being in the subdivision, but I mean, does it back up to the main road? Does it back up to railroad tracks? Is it underneath power lines if you're in Lewis Center or Powell? Those types of things matter. Not so much in today's market, but someday we're not going to be in an extreme seller's market, and the house next to the railroad tracks is going to take a heck of a lot longer to sell than the house that isn't next to the railroad tracks. I know right now it feels like they're worth the same amount, but someday that will be true. And that being somebody that lived through the crash of 2008, you were glad that you didn't sell that to your buyer. So just make sure you talk to your buyer about that if they insist on buying that one. So then I'm going to take all those properties, narrow them down to the most properties, which I'm not even sure that's a word. Most similar properties would have been the right way to say that, and identify the things that seem to be affecting the price most. So what I mean by that is if you have 5 two-story houses that are similar in square footage, bedrooms, bathrooms, if there's a discrepancy in price, what was it that caused that discrepancy? Sometimes the price discrepancy, which the one we're going to look at, is going to show that the price discrepancy can actually be the time that it sold. So pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID, right now, that's definitely, those are different pricing. Some of that could be the fact that one of them backed up to the railroad tracks and another one didn't. One of them might be the fact that the lot size was larger. So all those things are gonna matter. The easiest way to do that, which I'm going to show you in a second, is going to be to go in the MLS, look at map view, which I like, and then just scroll through the comparable properties. Then you're going to select the properties that are most like the subject, which is the one that you're going to, and then print an all neighborhood one-line CMA, and then drill in and print those, the one-line CMA for the properties that you selected. All right, so I went ahead and actually this isn't closed yet, but it is in contract. It's closing the beginning of next week. But the reason I picked this one is because it's somewhat unique from the perspective that it's in Blacklick, where there's a bunch of properties that are just like it. However, it's a little bit different. There's no basement. And the prices have just Blacklick between 200 and 300, inventory is down 80% compared to last year. And so what's happening with prices, I'm going to demonstrate why it's super important that you price to the moment first and go back. Because if we just applied the whole 12 months ago rule, we would be way off on pricing. And it's actually the way I got the listing, because the agent that helped them buy the house came in and priced to pre-COVID pricing. And it ended up being $25,000 less than what they're going to sell for in a cash offer. And so they hired me just because I recognized that. So, oh yeah, Patrick said insane over there with pricing. All right, so so the key points to this property are no basement, the square footage difference, the timing, the finishes, it was a former model home, and then the yard size and location, and then neighborhood versus area. So I'm gonna pop out of here real quick. And let me see if you guys can see this. Can you guys see the MLS now, or did I only share the PowerPoint?
Can't see the MLS.
You can?
I cannot. I just see Royal
Okay.
Blacklick.
Yeah.
Key
All right.
points.
I'm just going to share my screen. All right. Now can you see the MLS?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. So basically what I did two things. First, I went and dug into the neighborhood, and in Royal Elm, there really haven't been very many sold properties that are similar square footage and no basement. So then I went out and looked at just Blacklick. So first I did school district, but Blacklick, the school district for Licking Heights kind of extends outside of Blacklick over to Taylor Road. And that's a little bit of a different market. And from an appraisal perspective, they're going to look at stuff that's closer. So then I set up a search for homes with no basement. And this is what I got here. So right now there's 0 active properties. There are 5 contingent on financing and inspection, and then 3 that are pending. So this is, oh, this is already set up on my search. So this is the subject property right here. And basically it's 1974 square feet. Again, no basement. It's 4 bedroom, 2.5 bath. They just paid $222 for it in April of 2018. So basically what I'm going to first look at is, obviously we narrowed down the fact that there's no basement. Then I'm going to look at the style. So most of these are 2 stories. So I'll just leave the 1 story in there for convenience. And then I start looking at square footage here. So our subject is 1974. We've got a 1400, which is quite a bit smaller, and it's a bi-level. So we're going to leave that one out. We've got 2,000 square feet here. So that's very close. 2,300 is a little bit larger. 1,700 is a little bit smaller, but I like that because it seems like most of the other ones are larger. And then I'm really just kind of going through. Then with the sold properties, I want to start looking at when they actually sold. And let me actually look at my search here, because I set this up for 90 days out. For the solds, I'm going to go back 365 just to show you guys. So when we start looking at the solds, we definitely start to see that a lot of the ones that have been selling for the higher prices are larger in square footage. We have one that sold for $250. That was $1,790, and that was actually a huge driver for us on pricing. It closed on May 29th. So what I started doing was digging into these and looking at, like, when did places go into contract compared to when did they close. So this one went into contract 4/25. So if you guys remember from a timing perspective around COVID, that was when things started to open back up again. And then this one closed at the end of May. But it was one of the higher priced properties. It was one of the higher priced properties that had sold, like I said. As we start to go back in time, from that point, that was 5/29. Some of these other ones were still selling for less. Like this one was 2,400 square feet, sold for $235. Now it was listed at $229. So this is some of the stuff that was going on. So at the same time, people had this comparable to price at for $250. They were still pricing back 6 months ago and pricing for $229, and honestly probably cost their seller a pretty good amount of money, because people are somewhat reluctant to pay a lot over list price. Not always, obviously, but it's definitely something that you have to keep in mind as you're pricing. Yes, Patrick, it is, which is insane. Yes. So so $250, and then you see, like, going backwards in pricing a lot of times is going backwards in time. So if you go back to like the end of last year, you were seeing stuff that was 1940 same square footage in November that sold for 224. So you're really looking at square footage, and then you're also looking at that location. So then we went through, and so let's take a quick look at this, at these photos. So I'm going to hop in here and look at the photos and see what the condition was. Definitely super nice place, right? No granite, stainless steel appliances, first floor laundry. Pretty nice place. And so what I'm looking for in here as I'm pricing against these is, and then also how quick did it sell? So it sold in 6 days. I'm going to look on here, were there any that didn't sell quickly? So this was one that closed in January, was on the market for a couple weeks, which it's crazy that a couple weeks is not selling quickly. But this one was closed in November, was on for a while. Other than that, though, a lot of these had sold in just a couple days. So, and then you start seeing things like this, which this one closed right before we went on the market. But this one was 2,300 square feet, so quite a bit larger, but it listed for 229 and sold for 245. So you start seeing 15,000 over list price. So these are the types of things that we're going to start looking at and saying, okay, these places are selling for substantially over list price. Right now, again, we have zero competition. What can we list at? So obviously the seller wants to list as high as possible. In this case, what I was saying to them though was, especially at the time in early July or in mid-July, some of these places were just now starting to close that have been the higher priced places. And so you're talking about, hey, this one was, 600 square feet larger and it sold for 260. So 250 is probably too much. And yet this one was actually a little bit smaller and it sold for 250. So you kind of have to do that give and take and look at the different things and decide, how all those kind of mix together. Now, I feel like I'm really rambling here and not being very concise. So does anybody have any questions for me about how I got where I got, or have I just truly been rambling?
Quick question. So like Lisa and Ryan said they use about a 15% swing either way for square footage. So if you're at 2,000 square feet, they go 15% below that and 15% above that. Do you use a similar method for that?
I would say 10 to 15% is probably realistic for exact pricing. And I'm going to get into that when I talk about the appraisal. But yeah, I would say that's a pretty good rule of thumb. Now, obviously, if you get into the much larger homes, then you probably could go a little bit above that, depending on what they're getting for that extra square footage. Meaning if somebody has like this completely custom random room that's added, 400 square feet, like you get that a lot in like Scioto Reserve and some of those neighborhoods where they're all production builders. But a huge portion of their square footage above ground is actually the bonus room that's over the garage. And so like the value of that space is almost like a finished basement versus being true value from the perspective of living space. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the space above the garage, like on this picture here, I mean, this house, that's probably a bedroom, but so you would account for that being a different price per square foot? Oh, okay.
But if somebody has a bonus room above the garage that accounts for like they have a 3-car garage and everything above it is just a big bonus room, I look at that more like a finished basement than I do like, oh my gosh, we should apply the price per square foot method here and add, 150 times 400 square feet. So that's going to be like an extra $40,000.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood that then. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, when you said it at first, I kind of was questioning, like, I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily discount that house compared to something that was 300 or 400 square feet smaller because of the bonus room,
Okay.
as
And then,
far as using it as a comp.
and then, like Royal Elm, you've got a pretty decent amount of comps there, but I see you went outside some of the other neighborhoods. Um, I guess what made you do that? You just wanted to see like the other pricing in
Yep, so I'll show
Black, like,
you
'cause some of those are like
why I
Wagner
did
Chase,
it.
which is like
Because there
MI.
weren't very many comps that didn't have basements
Yeah.
that had sold recently. So the way that I'm going to set up that search is go in here, click this little pin, and type in the address. And locate, whoops, that's not the right one. Actually, did I type the wrong address in? I think I might have, but anyways, the house is here. It's the first one. So one of the things that I was looking at right away when I first started this comp is that it's the first house off of Wagner. So I was a little bit nervous about that. But if you look, and I'll show you in a second what the satellite view, what you can see is it's right next to a huge green space. And it's pretty far away from the road. So I kind of discounted that eventually after looking at the comparables. But when I did this and then I did no basement, especially at the time, there weren't very many comparables that had sold recently. So that was the reason why I went outside of the neighborhood. And I don't think there were any that I liked pricing wise, which also was a reason why I went outside the neighborhood, because there were a couple that I felt like were priced pretty low that they had used. Let me plug in my computer real quick before it dies.
While you're doing that, do you mind if I ask a question?
No, go ahead.
I just forgot my question. All right, I'm going to mute myself. Hold on.
I make you nervous, I know, being in the presence of stardom.
I'll think of it.
You unmuted yourself just to laugh. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yes.
All right, so this is what I saw when I looked at no basement. So
I remember what I had to say.
Okay, go ahead.
How did the appraisers, what miles do they use around, like diameter around the property that they're appraising? Do they have a certain mileage, or?
They're typically going to look mostly at the neighborhood, and that's what I'm going to get into in a minute when I talk about what appraisers look at. They're definitely not going to ignore lower priced comps. So this was definitely, like, this property here was a concern of mine because, and I think this one was listed right before us. Yeah. So this one was a concern of mine for a couple reasons. From an appraisal perspective, because it was actually 300 plus square feet larger, and it was listed at 242, right? And obviously we ultimately listed at 244.9 in the same neighborhood with no basement. So I felt like from an appraisal perspective, that could definitely be a problem for us if it closed before our before we did, because it was depending on what it sold for. So that was definitely something that that I was worried about. The one thing that made me feel better about it was that I didn't feel like the layout was quite as good. It felt more of like an apartment style, I guess, to me than our place was. But overall, this place was pretty nice once you got into the second floor. We have a much better patio, but again, as we'll get into in a second, the appraiser is not going to give us a ton of value for that. But when I looked at the closed, Patrick, I wasn't seeing anything that was super recent that was in the price point that I was looking for. So like this one was 2,780 square feet and it listed back in April. This one was almost 2,600 square feet. Even though it sold for 260, it had not, you know, price per square foot wise, it was only selling at 100 per square foot, which would put us down at 190, you know, just doing a quick value. So I went outside the neighborhood just to see if there was anything close that I would be able to use in a conversation with an appraiser. And that Willow Crossing one was definitely, it's literally right down the street, but just technically in a different neighborhood. So that was why I went outside. But like I said, I did remove Taylor Road, like the ones that have a Pataskala address versus a Blacklick address. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I've actually got one coming maybe in a few months coming up over there. So, and kind of the same thing. There's one on Connor Ridge and it hasn't sold and stuff like that. And they priced it pretty high. So I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, I will tell you to put it on sooner rather than later because it's insane.
I know.
So that was basically kind of the way that I came up. So anyways, and then I also had to reach out to a lot of agents because a lot of the ones that have sold recently for the highest prices were still in contract when I listed. And so we had to figure out, okay, what are you in contract for approximately? And then when do you close? Meaning, are you going to be there for our appraisal as a sold, or are you still going to be in contract? So that's what I was constantly looking at. So we ended up going with 244.9, and full transparency, I was a little anxious about that. I was feeling like that might be a tad high for what we're looking for. But I felt like compared to what was available, which was nothing, and what things were in contract for, that the buyers in the market were going to be willing to pay it. And so that's what we actually came down a few $1,000s from our original conversation, just in hoping that we were going to get the right terms instead of just right price. Any other questions on this one before we jump into appraisals? Okay, cool. Today I didn't dive into that as deep as I would. I have a class on the YouTube channel where I went through in detail exactly how I do a CMA, which you guys can go back and look at. One more thing I forgot to show you though that I will. When I'm looking at comparables and I've narrowed it down, this is just kind of a little hack. If you select the few properties that you want to use as comps and click on the map view, you can actually zoom in and see like what the different houses have by just clicking on the different ones. So you can see if they back up to railroad tracks, back up to other houses, back up to a main road, and you just kind of click through them there. That was the other thing, Patrick, is there was another high comp though that was still in contract that was across the street from Greenspace. Actually, no, it was right next to Greenspace. It was this house right here on Morningside that was in contract for a lot more than what it was listed at. And since ours was there, I just wanted to go out and find support for that just a little outside the neighborhood. All right, so if we jump back into the PowerPoint, what I did was I pulled, it's not gonna work for me. I pulled the old appraisal for me. So what do appraisers care about? So I really wanted to use some recent stuff from clients. Unfortunately, I haven't bought anything lately to have an appraisal of my own that I could share that was super recent. And this was the first one that I found from a property I bought back in 2014. But I think it actually kind of shows a few of the ways that appraisers, you know, look at comps. So first thing that you're going to see when you get to the comp page, hold on, let me see who's making the noise and muting. Okay.
Hey, Troy, I
Yeah.
had to leave the screen for a second. Where did you get this appraisal report from?
This is just from one of the properties that I sold. I can send all you guys the slides so you have it. But this is just a property that we bought, fixed up, and refied, and it was on North 6th Street in Wineland Park, back when you could buy properties for $100,000 in Wineland Park. And so basically, this is actually, though, gives you some really good comparisons here. So this is always the subject property on the left, and then you have 3 comparable properties here, and then you scroll down to a different page and you usually have 2 or 3 more. But this is some of the differences that they found. So obviously there's 0 solds here, but then you've got the sold prices across the top here, price per square foot, what the MLS numbers are, days on market, what type of financing it was, all of that stuff. So you can see if they were able to find out whether the seller paid closing costs on behalf of the buyer, they make adjustments for that. And then lot size, style, the quality of construction, and then also the condition are things that all the granite countertops and all those changes that we totally wish was a big deal. That's not a big deal in an appraisal. It takes a very bad condition in order to move off of C3. And basically, in order to be C4, you have to be a new build. As you can see, age-wise, if there's ever been an argument to get an adjustment because of the age, it would be 10 years old versus 80 or 100 years old. And I literally got no condition adjustment or age adjustment. So just recognize the fact that these sections here are the ones that buyers and real estate agents love to talk about: the stainless steel, the granite, the upgraded flooring, wood versus laminate, the carpet, all those things. It takes practically an act of God to get a condition adjustment. And even when you do, they're not nearly as big as you would like. So then you come down to these, and this is where you start to see the more commonly adjusted numbers. So bedrooms, this is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,344 square foot property. You can see the adjustments were made here for bedrooms. So they had an extra half bath but then they had 1 less bedroom. So she adjusted it $4,000. Anytime there's a positive number, that's increasing the value of your property appraisal. And whenever there's a negative number, it's decreasing the value. So this one had a $4,000 adjustment because we had an extra bedroom, but they did have an extra half bath. Here, theirs was a little bit larger, but because it was within that margin of error, Patrick, probably about 15% is about the number. So I'd never actually given that percentage to it, but that's probably a good rule of thumb. No adjustment was made. Everything else was the same here, but this one had a 2-car garage. So even in the $100,000 price point, a 2-car garage was worth $8,000. Now keep in mind, it would cost you probably about $20,000 minimum to have a 2-car garage built. and yet the appraiser's only giving it an $8,000 value. I would say to a buyer, it's probably worth 10 to 20,000. But to the appraiser, it's only worth 8. So if you take the $4,000 plus for the extra bedroom and the $8,000 minus for the garage, the net adjustment to this property was $4,000 to the negative. So they took the final or the sold price, subtracted 4,000, and so they're saying this was worth 123. Then move on to the next one. This one had 1.5 baths versus 2 full baths. She only gave me $1,000 for having 2 full baths instead of 1.5 baths. My opinion, that's not super fair, but you know, it's not me. So, so the change on this one was minus 1,500, and that was because they gave 2,500 in seller concessions. Then come over here, a 2-bedroom, 1 bath. So for 1 extra bedroom plus 1 bath, she gave a $5,000 adjustment, which is kind of crazy considering what she did here. But square footage was actually off by 100 square feet, still no adjustment. So, so this is an example of how they're gonna adjust. You also see basement below grade. There probably should have been an adjustment here because the house was 10 years old with poured basement with 9-foot ceilings compared to the cellar scary basements that existed most likely in these comparables, but she still gave no adjustment. So I'm going to stop here on this. Does anybody have any questions on what's going on here and what adjustments are fair or not fair and why?
Why is the half bath worth so much difference? Was that that much better, a half bath in the one than the other one?
What do you mean by that?
Well, didn't you say she's giving you $4,000 for the extra half bath on the one house and only $1,000?
No, on this one, I got $5,000 because I have an extra bedroom, 3 versus 2. So 3 for the subject, 2 versus this one. And then I also have 2 baths. So I have
Okay.
one full bath and 1 bedroom more.
Yeah, that 5,000 seems massively low for that.
Especially when she gave me 4,000 over here just for the bedroom. But
Yeah.
anyways. But the secret is I paid 86 for it, so no one felt bad for me.
Hey, I have a question on this.
Yeah.
And this, so with these multiple offers, I have gotten over the last couple of years a little bit more creative, and I've been having the buyer giving the seller concessions. So to not like, you know, potentially worry about the appraisal coming in low, that the buyer would be paying some of the seller's closing costs. So that's not affecting the appraisal, is it? Or because there's only
No.
seller's concessions, not buyer concessions.
Yeah, and remember that has to do with the subject. So, but you're right. I mean, I guess in theory, I've never had an appraiser call me and ask if there was a buyer concession on behalf of the seller.
Right.
My only comment to that would be to protect your buyer. I think you would be better off doing appraisal gap coverage because if you're paying the closing costs for them, then you're guaranteeing that cost for your buyer. Whereas with appraisal gap coverage, unless the appraisal comes in lower, your buyer's not paying it. Does that make sense? So you could still—
It definitely makes sense. Definitely.
Yeah,
No,
you could still pay the higher price. And then if the appraisal comes in, then they've just got a little bit extra down payment versus that full amount. But I do think, though, it's creative, right? Like you said, and sometimes it might mean something to the seller. So you never know what's going to mean something to the seller. Any other questions on appraisals? Because we could probably spend a whole class just talking about this one slide.
What does and under garage carport 2GD, 2DW mean again?
I think it means so it's 2 driveway spots and then 2 garage. I don't know what the D stands for. Garage doors, maybe.
Okay.
But basically, all of these had off-street parking, which is the DW. But this is the only one that actually had the garage. And then real quick, I'll just show you, I set this up. I pulled up all these comps. So this was the house that I bought. It didn't look like this when she appraised it, by the way. This is what it looked like when I bought it. You just put paint and carpet and clean it.
Yikes.
It was just paint, carpet, and cleaning. I think I put like $5,000 into it. And then these were the comparables. It looked more like this then, but this is still way nicer, to be honest with you. So if I was a buyer, I would have definitely bought this one. But this is a perfect example of how the appraiser doesn't care. Again, mine had new carpet and paint and everything else by the time it actually closed, or the appraisal happened. But you can see the differences in condition, right? Of all of these, like this is by far the best one. And that condition was exactly the same according to the appraiser. Also as this one, which I was in this one also, and this one was a dump. But they don't care. So that gives you an idea on the appraisal. The second part of the appraisal that I wanted to show you guys was this one, and this is where they actually talk about what they're appraising it at. And so she appraised it at 122. And she says things like, although sale 3 is over 6 months old, it's still considered to be a reliable indicator of value with no time adjustment warranted. All 3 sales are of renovated homes, which are similar in quality and condition to the subject. Sales 1 and 3 both lack 3 bedrooms, and sale 1 offers a 2-car garage. Close range in value indicated with all 3 sales, given consideration in the final opinion of value. So this is all written in verbiage that the underwriter wants to see, but the reason I highlighted that is to show you guys this is what the appraisers are looking for. They need to be able to give the underwriter a summary of why they came up with the value. So when they go beyond 6 months, they have to explain that it actually didn't impact anything. When they put in a 2-car garage versus not a 2-car garage, they need to explain why those things, why they still kept it in there. And then the appraisal is almost always made as is. The cost approach, I think this was a typo, to be honest with you, because this is supposed to be representative of what it would be worth if they had to rebuild it. And then the income approach is what it would be worth if from a rental perspective, which they didn't do in this example. So one of the things I wanted to talk real quickly on, I've got a few more things to run through, is how to price in the current market. So again, I strongly encourage you, although you have to look at the solds from an appraisal perspective, you also have to price according to the actives and in contracts. So reaching out to the agents to find out about price and closing date and when the appraisal's been done, so you can know what it's actually going to close for. Look only within the same neighborhood if possible, and you can't ignore low priced homes. So as much as I wanted to go like on Royal Elm and go and use that 250 and do the price per square foot, which would have made ours, you know, 270, I couldn't ignore those lower prices that had just sold in the area. The style, 1 ranch versus 2-story versus split level, super important. It takes a lot for appraisers to go between styles because the price per square foot gets so out of whack when you do that. Square footage within 15%. I love that rule of thumb, Patrick. Basement, no basement. And then deck and patio is super important as well, if there is one or isn't one. And then you've also got the location, yard, location in the subdivision, and or lot size. The one thing I didn't fit on here was parking. So if it has a garage, 2-car versus 3-car, etc. Usually the difference between a 2-car and a 3-car, they only give you about $5 grand. 5 to 10 grand difference depending on the neighborhood. And some of those things too are going to depend on whether, like, if you're the only 2-car garage in the neighborhood, you're going to get dinged a lot more probably on that than if you're or if you're the only 3-car garage in the neighborhood, you're going to get a lot less value compared to if you're the 2-car garage but everyone else is 3. So if no neighborhood comps are available, I always like to go back more than 12 months. So like, for example, I was doing one last week. I don't even remember the details, but it was a ranch, and there had only been one ranch that sold in the last year. And then there was no other ranches that sold in the neighborhood until like 3 years ago. But what I did is I went back and I looked at what the difference was 3 years ago in the pricing between the ranches and the 2 stories, just to kind of get a gauge. And then from there, I went outside the neighborhood. So always make sure you look at expireds and withdrawns to get that price range down. And then you can go outside of the neighborhood and look at the same school district or city or zip code. You can also look at an area. So if it's like in Columbus schools, obviously that's not going to be very specific. So then you can dive into German Village, Marion Village, Italian Village, that sort of thing. I mentioned earlier, I've been in this business too long, I guess, but during 2008, like the fact that you backed up to railroad tracks meant like either an extra 6 months on the market and or $30,000. Whereas right now it's like you still get a full price offer. So just make sure you remember that. But remember on offers too, like Chrissa mentioned, price, there's more than price, right? So there's as is. And what does that mean? Does that mean there's still an inspection, but they're agreeing not to ask for repairs? Or does that mean there's no inspection? Again, I haven't been selling real estate, obviously, as you guys know, for 20 months. This is insane. 2 listings in contract with not even an inspection. Like, that stuff is crazy. But so determine, can the buyer still terminate based on that inspection? And then we talked briefly about appraisal gap coverage or even waiving the appraisal. So all of those things are things that you can consider on offers. Home warranties. And the reason I bring that up in a pricing class is because I'm having a conversation with the seller about all of these things as a reason why we need to price it competitively, where it's going to appraise today. And then we're going to use these terms that are outside of the price by getting multiple offers in order to protect what we're actually going to go to closing with. Because what I say to sellers is, if I can get you a really high price on the day that you go into contract, but then at closing it's $15,000 less because of inspection and appraisal, then you lost $15,000. And everybody's like, oh, that makes complete sense. And then closing in possession is obviously something to keep in mind too. This is one of my favorite scripts. For those of you that know Zach Cantrell, I stole this from him, so I'll give him the credit. But this is a great script to talk to sellers about that want to overprice. And so what I say is, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, do you know that I have to sell your house 5 times before we actually get to closing? And they go, no, what do you mean? And I say, well, first I have to sell it and use your, give them the visual. First, I have to sell it to the agent. So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, in today's market, agents have to drop everything and run out to show a house due to extremely low inventory. So what that means is that before they ever go look at it, they're working to find every reason not to show your house. and waste their time and their client's time. So it's important that we sell it to the agent. The second person we have to sell it to is the buyers and their mom and dad. So they have to fall in love with it, and we have to make sure that it makes sense to mom and dad, which is sometimes impossible, but that's another class. The third person is the inspector. Inspectors get hired to find problems, and sometimes they create them if they can't find them. For those of you that have been selling for a while, you know what I mean by that. Even new builds have issues. I've had new builds where people hired an inspector, and even house that was approved, occupancy permit in hand from the city, still had inspection problems. The fourth person is to the appraiser. So they need to know why your house is worth what it's worth. So as I think Diane mentioned earlier, always send the appraiser when you're not sure about really, I would say always do this, but even especially if you're not 100% confident on value, or that the appraisal is going to come out the way you want it to, send the appraiser a couple things. Number one, make sure that they're your friend. So if it's in a condo association or a homeowners association, they have to reach out to the association, send them all the association docs that you have, and send them the contact information for the association. Send them how many offers they had, or you had, how many showings you had, and why in general you feel the house is worth what it's in contract for. I would not recommend sending them a full-blown market analysis. Some appraisers take that as your assumption that they don't know how to do their job, and they purposely go in a different direction. So I always try to just butter them up, make sure they know I'm a human. Now, if I'm really, really worried about the appraisal, I might even find a reason to meet them there. If your clients have like some old dog that would never do anything, offer to your clients to go meet them over there and put the dog in the backyard for the appraiser or something like that, and get the opportunity to make the appraiser just, you know, create a relationship with them. If people feel bad about giving you a low appraisal, sometimes they'll work harder. Appraisers are overworked right now. There's not enough of them. And the last person, which most people can never guess, is the underwriter. This is the one that most people forget, but it's one that's super important, especially in a shifting market. If we ever do see a major slowdown in the market, I can promise you that more and more underwriters are going to be kicking stuff back. Underwriters, if you've never met one, go meet one and you'll understand exactly what I mean by this. But underwriters are they don't really care about helping you most of the time. Their job at the bank is to protect the bank, not to protect your client moving in on time, and definitely not to protect your client getting the house of their dreams. They're worried about the value of it, and sometimes in a way that's just doesn't make any sense. Oftentimes they live in a different state, and so they don't know anything about the area. So they're looking at the appraisal, trying to figure out why the appraisal is too high. 9 times out of 10, if the underwriter's kicking it back for more information, it's because they believe that they should have considered comps that they didn't. And in today's day and age, with more and more automated valuation tools available, you know, the Zestimate and different things like that, if the appraisal's way off of some of those automated valuation tools, it could cause the underwriter to go back and start asking more questions.
So
So
Troy, what do
yeah.
you do in that case? Do you just, you know, set up a dialogue and go over the appraisal, or go over what comps were selected, or how would you approach that?
If the underwriter kicks it back?
Yeah.
So normally the underwriter is kicking it back to the appraiser because they don't agree with the value. So actually, usually we don't know about it until afterwards. And usually we as agents have no like open line of communication with the underwriter at all. So it's really impossible for us to talk to the underwriter most of the time. But yeah, you would through your loan officer send comps if once you were made aware of it and try to argue your case. But ultimately, then everything has to flow back to the appraiser, because the underwriter has the ability to influence the appraiser, but actually the appraiser still has to agree with the underwriter. But the underwriter can kick it back to them and say, like, I don't agree, you need to change it, and here's why. And usually the appraisers are only making about, in their pocket, probably about $300, maybe $400 every time they do an appraisal. So they're not making any more money, whether it appraises at or above value or below value. So the more headache they have, the less per hour they're making. And I know no one wants to hear that, but they truly, like, many appraisers are very good people. So I don't want to say that they're bad, but it's human nature. Once you've turned in your report, everything you do after that, you're basically doing for free. And so if the underwriter kicks it back and there's an argument, usually the appraiser is just going to end up doing what the underwriter wants, because at the end of the day, the underwriter has to approve it in order for the appraiser to get paid. So it's very rare that an appraisal comes in low and they're willing to make the adjustment, honestly. Unless there were egregious errors in the report itself, it takes a lot to get an appraiser to change their value once they've completed their report. And unfortunately, my opinion is that money often has a play in that. And sometimes too, it's just, we want the value, obviously, and they just disagree. It's an opinion. An appraisal is an opinion. So does that make sense, Kendra?
Yep.
Kinda. Okay, cool.
Yep.
Anybody else have any questions?
Troy, I just wanted to touch on, and this keeps coming up when people are adding square footage for a finished basement with egress, and others are still saying, no, you're not adding that much extra value. Can you kind of give me your opinion on what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely not going to count in the same way the first floor space does. I mean, if you think about it, would you live in the basement just because the bedroom has an egress window? And the answer is no, most people wouldn't. And that's why it's not worth as much. Now, can it still be counted as a bedroom safely? Yes. However, if you have a walkout basement, you have a little bit more of an argument. But even then, tell somebody don't put any windows on the back side of your house. Do you think if you went into the first floor and the whole back side of the house was just drywall with no windows, how would you do selling that?
Right.
And that's really the logic that appraisers are using. They're saying, okay, yeah, it meets code. Somebody can sleep here. But from a value perspective, like, it's just not the same as living upstairs. And so therefore square footage, and that is a huge conversation. And Diane, I know you sell a ton in the higher price range. So I'd love to get your input on this, but yeah, square footage in basements is, $30 a square foot, sometimes up to 50 if it's done really, really well. And sometimes less.
Yeah, that's.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, that's what I've heard too. Like I can't remember where I read it or heard about it, but somebody said something about if you look at what a builder charges to to finish the basement space, it's anywhere between $30 to $50 per square foot, and that's typically the best way to price it out.
Yeah, and I would say if you're doing higher end stuff and it's finished higher end, 50, but I mean, I would say in most like production type finished basements, if somebody just put up drywall and carpet, 30 is probably high, honestly.
So if it's finished to match the upstairs walkout and windows, it's still only 50?
Probably. I mean, you're going to get some adjustments for the extra bedrooms and the extra rooms. but yeah, they're absolutely, it's going to show up different from, so on the appraisal, it's going to show up different. So here you've got your square footage, gross living area, and then finished basement or finished rooms below grade is going to show up in this section here. So it doesn't even show up in the same section as gross living area above ground, even if it's finished.
So I always wondered in MLS when it says how much it's sold price per square foot, what is it taking? Just the documented square footage or the ATFLS?
Yeah, MLS is taking documented, but most websites like Zillow and Realtor.com are using ATFLS. So you have to be very careful.
Go ahead.
I'm good.
So how are all these patio homes going to appraise in the future if they are counting the lower level rooms?
When you say patio homes, I think of slabs. So what do you mean by that?
No, these are full basements with a bedroom and a rec room downstairs and a full bath down there. Finished to match the upstairs, but my concern is how are they going to appraise in the future?
That's a really good question because you are seeing a lot of that in the high end empty nester housing. Is you get 2 bedrooms on the main level and 1 in the lower level. And actually, I just sold a listing. I had a listing and it sold in River Highlands, and those are just what you were talking about.
So I mean, that's the thing is, if all the rest of them in the neighborhood are like that, then that's how they're gonna appraise.
But my appraiser actually came in $30,000 below the sale price.
Ouch.
Thank God we had appraisal gap for anything, but that was very shocking.
The thing is, though, now if the neighbor lists, it won't because they can use your comp.
Right.
I mean, there's definitely a supply and demand thing going on right now, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, well, there's such high demand compared to the supply. You know, sales are only down 10% and inventory is down 50. I mean, it's simple math. So I think, so it's causing prices to go up. But I do think, to your point, if nothing has sold recently, you could definitely run into a major issue with that if you have to go outside the neighborhood. Absolutely.
And Krista, didn't they charge like closer to $100 a square foot for the finished basement in the higher end?
I don't know what they counted. That's a good question. I know the builder I represent, he charges $40 a square foot for finishing the basement. But of course, it all depends on the finishes, you know, and how, is there a wet bar? Is there a bedroom? Is there a full bath? You know?
Yeah, exactly. And that $40, but you got to remember too, that's brand new. So once it's lived in, it's not brand new anymore. I mean, you can't expect to get exactly the price per square foot that you paid for something 10 years later when you go to resell it.
No, but that's the bulk of what I'll be selling is those patio homes with the finished lower level, because technically they only need the 2 bedrooms upstairs, but in order to be for resale, they have to have the 3rd, so they put it downstairs.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be embarrassed if.
Well, again, I mean, as long as you're in a neighborhood with it. Now, if you go out into the middle of the country and build that same house, I'd have bigger concerns.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because you're gonna price with the demand in the neighborhood, and also your market in that case is often going to be people that are selling a larger home that have a lot of cash and equity to overcome those gaps. But definitely, if you go into a full-blown buyer's market, those places are gonna struggle because it's 2 bedrooms versus other places that have 3.
That's just how they're doing it. They're paying cash, so the appraisal isn't an issue. But for those that didn't pay cash, it's going to be an issue in the future.
Yeah, it could be if prices drop.
They're just gambling they'll be dead. No, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that.
Some people are. All right, any other questions?
Thank you.
Thanks, Troy.
Very
This was a
helpful.
great
Thank
class.
you.
All right, awesome. Well, anytime you guys want me to teach this class again, let me know.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
Troy.
Maybe next time you can give us some homework and we can see if we come up with the same price you did.
All right. Sounds good. I know, Christina, I'm so sorry if I'm being
That's okay.
honest with you. I put this together like in the last 3 hours, so
That's
was-
okay. Thanks.
No,
I
I learned some things on MLS I didn't even know were there. So thank you.
you're welcome. All right, we'll see you guys. Have a good one.
Go,
See ya.
Jackie.
I know.
Bye.